You ever get stuck in one of those group projects
Oh,
where
yeah.
sometimes, like, it just clicks?
Okay.
Everybody's working together, the ideas are flowing. You walk away feeling like you actually learned something.
Absolutely.
But then other times,
Right.
just like pulling teeth.
Oh, yeah. Total frustration.
Yeah, and you just feel like you're carrying the whole team, and you're like, man, I could have just done this myself.
Right. And you wonder why you even bothered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's the secret sauce? What makes some collaborative learning experiences, like, amazing and others a total flop?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that you've brought some really cool research to try and unpack. And what's really neat is that this research tackles this question from two different angles.
Okay.
One, how learners actually interact with each other. The nuts and bolts of how they collaborate.
Yeah, like the actual process.
Exactly. And the other is what's going on inside their heads.
Oh, interesting.
How are their brains dealing with information when they're working together?
I like it. So we've got like the group dynamics and then the brain stuff.
Yeah, kind of like the social and the cognitive sides of the coin.
Okay, cool. So the research you sent over really dives into these two perspectives. We've got the process of collaboration, and then we've got this thing called cognitive load theory,
Right.
which I gotta admit sounds a little intimidating.
Yeah, it's basically about how our brains manage information.
Okay, so today we're going on a mission
We are.
to connect these ideas and figure out what's really happening when we learn together.
It's like we're cracking open the hood.
Right, like what's going on under the surface.
And your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to journey with us into the black box of collaborative learning.
Ooh, black box. Okay. It sounds mysterious.
It is. And we want to go beyond just asking, is group work better than solo work?
Right.
And actually figure out what are the specific ingredients
Our recipe.
exactly that make collaborative learning successful for everyone involved.
So not just whether it works or not, but like how it works and why it works?
That's the goal.
Okay, I'm in. So let's talk about this black box idea. The research mentions something called effect-oriented research, which is kind of like the starting point for a lot of the early work on collaborative learning.
Right. It's kind of like the first wave of research.
Okay, so break that down for me. What is effect-oriented research?
Well, imagine you're a researcher. You want to know if group work is good for learning.
Okay.
So you take a bunch of students, you divide them into groups, and some of them you have work alone.
Control group.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you see who does better on a test or some other measure of learning.
Okay, so just comparing the results.
That's it. That's effect-oriented research in a nutshell. You're looking at the effects of collaboration on learning outcomes.
So just focusing on the end product.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of research that's been done this way. I mean, a huge amount. Like Johnson & Johnson did a review back in 2009, and they found over 1,200 studies just comparing group work to individual work.
Wow, that's a lot of studies.
It is. And those meta-analyses, those studies of studies, suggest that collaboration can be really good for certain things.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, things like remembering information and solving complex problems. Where you really have to think critically and apply what you've learned.
So for those higher level skills, collaboration seems to have a leg up.
It seems that way.
But you said can be really good. Does that mean it's not always a slam dunk?
Right. And that's where the black box analogy comes in. Because just looking at those end results, those test scores, doesn't tell us the whole story.
Okay, I see. So like some studies show these amazing benefits of group work, but then others, like the ones by Anderson and Ronberg or Kirshner and their colleagues, didn't find the same positive results.
Right. And that's the problem with just focusing on effects. We're left wondering why sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
So it's inconsistent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And researchers like Cohen and Dillenberg were some of the first to really point this out. They argued that we need to understand what's happening inside that black box.
Yeah. What are the actual mechanisms?
Exactly. We need to know what's going on during the collaboration that might be explaining these different outcomes.
So instead of just looking at the before and after, we need to peek inside the process itself.
Precisely. And that's where process-oriented research comes into play.
Okay, so process-oriented research is all about what happens during the collaboration.
Exactly. It shifts our focus to the interactions between the learners, what they're saying, what they're doing, how they're responding to each other.
So like the nitty-gritty details of how they work together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the goal here is to identify specific features of those interactions.
Okay.
Like, are they asking each other questions? Are they explaining things? Are they building on each other's ideas?
So we're looking for patterns.
Yes, patterns of interaction that seem to be linked to better learning outcomes.
So like a recipe for successful collaboration?
Kind of.
Right.
And researchers like Dillenberg and van der Linden were really instrumental in pushing this process-oriented approach.
And the research you sent over dives into a couple of really interesting examples of this in action. The first one focuses on the idea of giving and receiving explanations, and it highlights the work of a researcher named Webb.
Oh yeah, Webb's work is really foundational in this area.
Okay, so tell me more about that. What did Webb find?
Well, one of her key findings is that simply giving a quick answer to a group member who's stuck isn't very helpful for learning. Like
Oh,
if someone's struggling with a math problem and you just say, oh, the answer is 12,
yeah, that's not very helpful.
right? It doesn't really help them understand the concept.
So what does work?
What's really effective is when you provide a detailed explanation that includes the reasoning behind the answer.
Why?
Exactly. It's that why that seems to make a big difference in student achievement.
So instead of just saying the answer is 12, you'd say something like the answer is 12 because you have to multiply these two numbers and then add this one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're forcing them to think through the process and understand the underlying concepts.
Makes sense. So you're saying giving those detailed explanations is good for the explainer.
Yes, it seems to help them solidify their own understanding.
But what about the person on the receiving end of the explanation?
That's where things get a little bit more tricky.
How so?
Well, Webb's research also suggests that just hearing a good explanation isn't enough.
Okay.
The person receiving the explanation needs to be able to actually use it to apply that knowledge to a new situation.
So they can't just passively absorb it.
No, they have to actively make sense of it and figure out how to apply it in a different context.
It's like learning how to ride a bike. You can't just watch someone else do it.
Right, you have to actually get on the bike and try it yourself.
So even if you get a perfect explanation, if you can't use that knowledge, it's not really going to stick.
That's what the research suggests. And here's another interesting wrinkle.
Mm.
The research also found that the composition of the group matters.
What do you mean?
Well, it seems that having a certain level of expertise in the group can actually improve the quality of the explanations that are given.
So like if you have a mix of abilities in the group.
Exactly. If everyone in the group is struggling with the same concepts, the explanations might not be as thorough or accurate.
But if you have someone who's a little bit ahead, they can kind of guide the others.
That's the idea. They can provide those deeper explanations that really help everyone learn.
Okay, so that makes sense. Now, the research moves on to look at group-level interactions, this time focusing on the work of Barron.
Ah, yes. Barron's work is fascinating.
So what was Barron interested in?
Well, she wanted to understand what made some groups really effective at collaborating and others not so much.
So, like, what were the successful groups doing differently?
She found that the successful groups tended to respond more appropriately to each other's ideas.
Oh, interesting.
So if someone proposed a solution or offered an idea, the other group members would actually engage with it.
So they weren't just like, okay, whatever.
No, they would acknowledge the idea, maybe build on it, or even start a discussion around it.
So it's about creating a space where everyone feels heard and valued.
Exactly. It's about fostering that sense of shared understanding and joint attention.
Joint attention.
Yeah, like everyone's on the same page, focused on the same goal.
Okay, so they're really working together as a unit.
Precisely. Now, on the flip side, the less successful groups would often ignore suggestions or just dismiss them without any real consideration.
So they weren't really collaborating. They were just kind of doing their own thing.
Kind of. And what's really interesting is that Barron found a link between these group interaction patterns and individual learning outcomes.
You mean the people in those successful groups actually learn more?
Exactly. They showed better individual mastery of the material and were also better at transferring what they learned to new situations.
So the group dynamic doesn't just affect how well the group works together, it actually impacts individual learning.
That's the takeaway.
That's really powerful. Now, the research also touches on this idea of coordination and regulation within a group. What does that mean?
Well, it refers to how well the group manages both the learning task itself and the process of working together.
Okay.
So it includes things like planning their approach, monitoring their progress, evaluating their ideas.
It's just like metacognitive stuff.
Exactly. It's about thinking, and it also involves coordinating who's doing what, discussing strategies for collaboration, and even reflecting on how well their teamwork is going.
Wow, that's a lot to juggle.
It is. Researchers like Erkens, van der Meijden, and Veenman have really explored these aspects of collaboration.
Now I'm starting to wonder, is there a potential downside to all this focus on the process? Like, could it be too much?
That's a great question. And actually, some researchers have raised that very concern.
Really?
Yeah. For example, F. Kirshner has argued that focusing too much on coordination and regulation could actually take away from the learning itself.
So it's like a trade-off.
Exactly. You want
Yeah.
the group to function smoothly, but you don't want the mechanics of collaboration to become so demanding that they overshadow the actual learning content.
That makes sense. Like, you don't want to spend so much time figuring out who's doing what that you never actually get any work done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the research also points out that there are some limitations to focusing solely on these interaction processes.
Okay. What do you mean?
Well, one issue is that process-oriented research often looks at very specific behaviors,
Okay.
like whether students are asking questions or giving explanations.
Right.
But it doesn't always consider where those behaviors come from.
Like the context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like how might the initial skills or knowledge of the group members influence those interactions?
So it's not just about what they're doing, but also why they're doing it.
Right. And another limitation is that it doesn't always make a clear connection between those interaction patterns and actual learning gains.
So we might see that students are asking each other lots of questions,
Right.
but we don't know for sure if that's actually helping them learn more.
Exactly. And a researcher named Studolsky pointed this out pretty forcefully. She argued that we need to understand both what leads to certain collaborative behaviors and what learning outcomes result from those behaviors.
So it's not enough to just observe what's happening in the group.
Yeah.
We need to connect it to both the inputs and the outputs.
Precisely.
Okay, so that brings us to the second big piece of the puzzle, cognitive load theory.
Or CLT for short.
CLT. Now, for those of us who aren't cognitive scientists, what is cognitive load theory all about?
Well, at its core, CLT is about how our brains process information.
Okay.
And the basic idea is that our working memory, the part of our brain where we hold and manipulate information, has a limited capacity.
So like a mental workspace.
Exactly. And it's like RAM in a computer.
Okay.
You can only run so many programs at once before things start to slow down.
Right, if you have too many tabs open.
Exactly. And learning happens when we build these more permanent knowledge structures called schemas in our long-term memory.
Schemas. So that's like our organized knowledge about the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's how we make sense of things. But if we overload our working memory with too much information or poorly designed tasks,
Okay.
it can actually hinder this process of schema construction.
So it's like trying to cram too much stuff into a suitcase.
Yeah, it just won't close properly and some things might get lost or damaged.
So we need to be mindful of how much we're asking our brains to process at any given time.
That's the key insight of CLT. And some of the big names in this theory are Pfaff and Sweller.
Okay. Now, how does this all relate to collaborative learning?
Well, the research suggests that when students collaborate, the group as a whole has more processing capacity.
Because you have multiple brains working together.
Exactly. It's like having multiple computers networked together.
So the group has more RAM.
Exactly. And that can be a huge advantage for tackling complex tasks.
Okay, now the research also talks about this borrowing and reorganizing principle. What is that all about?
This is an idea developed by Sweller, and it suggests that humans are essentially designed to learn from each other.
Oh, interesting.
We build our own understanding by imitating and borrowing information from others.
So we're like social learners.
Exactly. And collaboration is a prime example of this principle in action because group members are constantly sharing, explaining, and building on each other's knowledge.
So it's like we're all contributing to this shared pool of knowledge.
That's a great way to put it.
But there must be some potential downsides to this whole shared processing thing, right?
Absolutely. And the research introduces this concept of a distribution advantage versus transaction costs.
Okay, break that down for me.
So the distribution advantage is basically the benefit of dividing a task among multiple people.
Like many hands make light work.
Exactly. Each person has less individual cognitive load because they're only responsible for a part of the task.
But then there are these transaction costs.
Right. And those represent the additional mental effort that's required for communication coordination and managing all those interactions within the group.
So it's like the overhead of working together.
Exactly. It takes mental energy to explain your ideas to make sure everyone's on the same page to resolve disagreements.
So it's not all sunshine and roses.
No collaboration has its costs. And researchers like Sabora and Olson, as well as Yamani, have written a lot about these costs.
And you're saying these transaction costs can actually be good or bad for learning.
Exactly. It depends on what those costs are being spent on.
Okay, explain.
So if the communication and coordination are leading to a deeper shared understanding, if they're promoting constructive debate, and helping students articulate their ideas, then those are considered germane transaction costs.
Germane.
Yeah, it means relevant or helpful to the learning process.
Yeah, okay, so germane costs are actually good.
Exactly. They're like an investment.
Okay.
They might require some effort up front, but they pay off in terms of deeper learning.
But then there are the bad transaction costs.
Right. And those are called extraneous transaction costs.
Extraneous, like unnecessary.
Exactly. These are the costs that get in the way of learning.
So give me some examples.
Well, things like misunderstandings, unresolved conflicts, or unnecessary repetition.
So like if you're spending all your time arguing about who's doing what instead of actually discussing the material.
Exactly. That's extraneous cognitive load. It's not helping you learn, it's just creating noise and frustration.
And who are some of the researchers who've looked into this?
Well, Bernard and Lunger and Carroll have done some great work on this, as well as Webb and Pellingsar.
Okay, so it sounds like the effectiveness of collaboration really hinges on this balance between the distribution advantage and the transaction costs.
Exactly. It's like a seesaw.
If the distribution advantage outweighs the extraneous costs, then collaboration is a win.
Exactly. But if those extraneous costs start to pile up,
Then it might be better to work alone.
it might be.
Mm.
And the research points out that this balance can shift depending on a lot of factors.
Like what?
Well, the complexity of the task, the knowledge and skills of the learners, the group dynamics, all of these things can influence whether those transaction costs are helpful or harmful.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Definitely. And that's why it's so important to understand these underlying mechanisms.
So we can design collaborative learning experiences that actually work.
That's the goal.
Now, the research also talks about how CLT offers a different way to assess learning in collaborative settings. It's not just about looking at test scores.
Right. CLT argues that we should also be considering the cognitive load that learners experience during the learning process.
So not just what they learned, but how much mental effort it took to learn it.
Exactly. And Peltiez and Van Marienboer have done a lot of work in this area.
So how do we measure cognitive load?
Well, there are a few different techniques. But the basic idea is to try to gauge how much mental effort someone is expending.
Okay.
You can do this through self-report measures, like asking people to rate how difficult they found a task.
Okay.
Or you can use physiological measures like heart rate or pupil dilation.
Wow, so we can actually see how hard someone's brain is working.
In a way. And the idea is that if someone can achieve the same level of performance, but with less cognitive load, it suggests that they've learned more effectively.
So they've built those schemas more efficiently.
Exactly. They have a deeper and more flexible understanding of the material.
That's really cool. And the research even uses this term performance efficiency to describe this idea of learning efficiently.
Right. It's about combining measures of performance and cognitive load to get a more complete picture of learning effectiveness.
Now, the research circles back to the importance of task complexity, bringing in the work of F. Kirshner again. How does CLT help us understand why the difficulty of the task matters so much for collaborative learning?
Well, F. Kirshner and her colleagues hypothesized that collaboration is most beneficial when the task is challenging enough,
Okay.
that individuals are likely to hit the limits of their working memory.
So the task is too much for one person to handle alone.
Exactly. In those situations, the ability to distribute the cognitive load among group members becomes really valuable.
Because you're essentially increasing the group's RAM.
Exactly. And their research found that for these complex tasks, collaboration often led to better and more efficient learning.
But what happens when the task is too easy?
Well, for tasks that are simpler and well within the capacity of an individual learner, collaboration can actually become less effective.
Why is that?
Because in those cases, the cognitive effort required for coordination and communication can outweigh the benefits of shared processing.
So it's like adding extra steps to a recipe that's already simple.
Exactly. It just makes things more complicated without actually improving the end result.
So there's a sweet spot for task complexity.
There seems to be. And that's why it's so important to carefully consider the demands of the task when designing collaborative learning experiences.
So we're not just throwing students into groups and hoping for the best.
No, we want to be strategic about it.
Now, the research also points out that CLT has its own limitations when it comes to understanding collaborative learning. What are some of those?
Well, one of the main limitations is that CLT often focuses on the overall cognitive load, but it doesn't always tell us which specific aspects of the collaboration are contributing to that load.
So it's like getting a total calorie count for a meal, but not knowing which foods are the most calorie dense.
Exactly. We might know that a particular collaborative activity results in high cognitive load,
Right.
but we don't necessarily know why. Is it because students are struggling to understand the material? Or is it because they're spending all their time trying to coordinate with each other?
So we need to break it down.
We do. We need to connect those cognitive load measurements to what's actually happening during the collaboration.
So we need to know what they're talking about, how they're communicating, who's participating, all of those details.
Exactly. And researchers like Van Gogh have also pointed out this need for a more process-oriented approach within CLT research itself.
So both process-oriented research and cognitive load theory have their strengths and weaknesses.
They do. And that's why the really exciting part of the research you sent is where it talks about combining these two approaches.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's where things get really interesting. So how do we put these two pieces of the puzzle together?
Well, the authors argue that by integrating the insights from process-oriented research with the framework of CLT, we can get a much richer understanding of collaborative learning.
Okay, I'm following.
So process-oriented research tells us how students are interacting, what they're saying and doing.
Right.
And CLT helps us understand the cognitive consequences of those interactions on learning.
So we're looking at both the what and the why.
Exactly. We're trying to see how those interactions are impacting students' mental effort and ultimately their learning outcomes.
So by looking at both the process and the cognitive load, we can start to figure out which collaborative behaviors are helpful and which ones are harmful.
Exactly. You can start to see which behaviors are associated with germane cognitive load, the kind that supports learning,
Right.
and which behaviors are associated with extraneous cognitive load, the kind that gets in the way.
So for example, if we see that students are spending a lot of time explaining things to each other, and we also see that their cognitive load is relatively low,
Exactly.
that would suggest that those explanations are actually beneficial.
It would suggest that those explanations are promoting germane cognitive load and helping students build those schemas.
But if we see that students are constantly interrupting each other or talking over each other,
Right.
and their cognitive load is high,
That would suggest that those interactions are creating extraneous load and hindering their learning.
so this combined approach gives us a way to really dissect the collaborative process and see what's working and what's not.
Exactly.
Mm.
And it can also help us evaluate the effectiveness of different instructional designs for collaborative learning.
Okay, so if we design a collaborative activity and we see that students are engaging in lots of helpful behaviors
Right.
and their cognitive load is low, that's a good sign.
It is. It means we're on the right track.
But if we see lots of unhelpful behaviors and high cognitive load, we need to go back to the drawing board.
We probably do. And Kirshner and her colleagues have really emphasized the importance of this integrated approach.
Now, the research also suggests that this combined approach can help us understand the bigger picture of collaborative learning, like how factors like task complexity and group composition play into all of this.
Absolutely. Instead of just looking for simple correlations between, say, group composition and test scores,
Right.
we can start to map out those more complex relationships between all these different factors.
So we're looking at the whole system.
We are. We're trying to understand how everything interacts.
Now, the research gives this really interesting example from Dennison and his colleagues. They found that medium ability students actually learned more effectively when they were paired with lower ability students.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic finding.
Why is that?
Well, one explanation is that it creates more opportunities for the medium ability students to explain the material.
Because they have to teach it to their lower ability partners.
Exactly. And remember, we talked about how giving explanations can be really beneficial for learning.
Right, so the medium ability students are getting that extra boost from having to explain things.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And the research suggests that we could actually test this hypothesis
Ow.
by adding cognitive load measures to studies like this.
So we could see if the medium ability students in those mixed ability groups are experiencing a different type or level of cognitive load than the students in the more homogeneous groups.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That would give us more evidence to support this explanation.
And that's the power of combining these two approaches, right?
Absolutely. We can start to get at those deeper mechanisms that drive collaborative learning.
Now, this is where things get really wild. The research talks about using the collaborative process itself to measure cognitive load.
I know, isn't that cool?
So instead of relying on self-report or physiological measures,
Right.
we can actually look at how students are interacting and use that as an indicator of their cognitive load.
Exactly. And the research highlights the work of Khawaja and his colleagues who looked at linguistic features of collaboration.
Linguistic features.
Yeah, like the words and phrases that students use when they're working together.
Okay.
And they found some interesting correlations. For example, they found that longer pauses in speech were associated with higher cognitive load.
So if someone's really struggling to process information, they're more likely to pause a lot.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And they also found that a decreased use of singular pronouns like I and me
Okay.
was correlated with higher cognitive load.
So they're using more plural pronouns like we and us.
Exactly. And that suggests that when people are under high cognitive load, they're more likely to focus on the group as a whole rather than themselves as individuals.
Wow, that's fascinating. And this opens up a whole new way of thinking about cognitive load measurement, right?
It does. It suggests that we might be able to get a sense of how much mental effort a group is expending just by analyzing their language.
And that's really powerful because it's less intrusive than some of those other methods.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
more naturalistic.
Right. And it also allows us to study how cognitive load changes over time.
Exactly. We can see those peaks and valleys of mental effort,
And that can help us identify those critical moments in the collaborative process.
the moments where students are most likely to need support or guidance.
This has been an amazing journey into the world of collaborative learning. We've covered so much ground.
We have.
So if we were to distill it down to one key takeaway, what would it be?
I think the biggest takeaway is that to really understand collaborative learning, we need to look at both the process and the cognitive load.
The how and the how much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to consider both the dynamics of how students are interacting and the mental effort that those interactions require.
And combining those two perspectives gives us a much richer understanding than either approach alone.
Absolutely.
So for you, the listener who's always trying to learn more effectively,
Right.
this research has some really important implications. It can help you become a more strategic and mindful participant in collaborative learning environments. Exactly.
By understanding how the process of collaboration and the demands on your working memory interact, you can really maximize the benefits of group work.
And if you're in a position to design collaborative learning experiences,
Right.
this research can guide you in creating activities that are both engaging and effective. So here's a question for you to ponder. Given the complexity of both individual and group dynamics, how might we use technology to support those really beneficial aspects of collaboration?
Right. The things that deepen understanding.
Exactly, while minimizing those extraneous costs that can get in the way.
That's a great question.
Hmm.
And here's another one. What can you do as an individual to prepare for collaborative learning sessions to make sure you're getting the most out of them?
These are important questions to consider, and we encourage you to reflect on your own experiences with collaborative learning in light of what we've discussed today.
There's always more to explore at this fascinating intersection of how we learn together and how our minds work.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of collaborative learning.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.
And those collaborations flowing.